Hello, everyone. Welcome to Food Real Talk Food Safety with Tia and Jill.
I know it's
We're
been we
said that,
weren't
right?
here last week, so it's been a couple of weeks and we have to like get back into practice, right?
There you go. And we're excited to be here because yes, we did skip last week. It was the holidays. So we took some time with our family, but we had an amazing replay last week. So hopefully you all caught it.
Yes, yep. And yeah, the replay last week was all about leadership with Lisa Robinson and
Mhm.
amazing woman. So
Yes.
I think she's gonna be at IFP. So if anyone's heading over there, like great time to catch Lisa if you have any questions or follow-ups on that.
Absolutely. And we'll be at IFP next week too.
That's true. I guess we could say that.
Which we're excited about. So if you are going to be at IFP, put in the comments, let us know, say hello. Because we want to meet you in person if it's for the
We do.
first time or see you again if we've met.
Yeah, of course, that's to me, that's what these shows, conferences, workshop meeting things are all about. Because
Agreed.
while the content is can be really interesting, we also, get a lot of access to content already, especially if we've built our network when we reach out, which is
Mhm.
cool. It's a different perspective sometimes, but it's also really a spot where you get to like stop and be like, hey, can we talk in person?
Yeah.
We get to have conversations in a new way. And of course, you all know that we talk about new and changing conversations is what drives culture and growth.
Yes. Absolutely. And you're absolutely right. It's all about using each part of what you have, right, in your network to continue to grow and connect. And like you said, have different conversations from different perspectives because that's what it's all about.
Yes, it certainly is. And so we are so happy to be here. We're happy to be there next week.
Hmm. We are. And we're
We
happy
are.
to be here today.
We are because today we have a really, I don't want to say it's outside our norm, but these are some of the conversations that we have in smaller circles. And we're like,
Mhm.
why aren't we talking about this in a little bit broader area?
Yeah.
Because, we keep hearing, gosh, well, we all know like economically things have been changing. That
Hmm.
inflation rates and unemployment, and we hear companies talking about budget cuts and people who have cut jobs and freezes. And so, what does that mean when you are a leader in food safety and quality?
Yes. Yes. And we feel it, right? Like we feel it even in great times, right? Like we feel that pressure. But when we are in this slowdown period, we feel it even more because people start asking us, well, do we really need that? Or do we really need those resources? We're a support function. So we're supporting operations and we're supporting the making of the product. And so people like to start to look at those groups and say, well, can you cut in this area? Or do we really have to do this? Can we not just do something a little bit different that's going to save us money or that's going to eliminate a cost? And so I've been there, right? Having those conversations and they can wear you down.
They can, and it can also sometimes seem like you're getting mixed messages
Oh, yes. Yes.
because, right, sometimes they'll be like, we're going to lay off a bunch of people, but yet now we still have labor shortages.
Yes.
Or we are, like we just talked about, we're going to cut budgets or we're going to have freezes, but yet you still need to be innovative and move the business forward.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, how do these things coexist?
Exactly. Exactly. How do you get work done with less resources? Or how do you um, how do you still try to prioritize these things that you need to prioritize while the organization might be cutting some resources that's supporting those priorities?
Yeah.
And that's definitely mixed messages, right?
It is. And like how much of a slowdown or, how much uncertainty is part of like we talked about normal fluctuations versus beyond. And
Hmm.
there's a website out there, Chief Learning Officer, and they had a great kind of overview and talked about, we go through plenty of ups and downs all the time. Think SPC chart, normal variation,
Yeah. Yes.
right? But when you all of a sudden get a signal, like hopefully that doesn't happen often. And the same
Yeah.
thing happens when we talk about these really severe economic slowdowns or uncertainty. But we've also been in a really strange place the past few years with the pandemic and supply chain and the inflation. There's a war, there's climate change, all these other factors that are coming in together.
Yeah, yeah, and it makes it difficult, right? It's one of the reasons why we focus on leadership and being equipped from a leadership standpoint, because these times, this won't be the last time, right?
No.
We know we're going to see these blips. How are you making sure that your organization is set up for success even during these times?
It is. And on top of that, we advocate and champion for how do you take better care of people.
Right.
Because living in this state of uncertainty is exhausting. No matter how great we say we're flexible and resilient and all of that, like
exhausting.
What are we practicing and doing? I mean, of course, there's a whole bunch of things, right? Like burnout is at an all-time high here in America, and that uncertainty is what's part of what's driving that.
Yeah.
And coping, I'm going to say coping skills.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Right. And that's why we talk a lot about self-coaching. Like, how do you develop, your self-care, self-coaching tools to help navigate these type of uncertainties? Because that's what we're here in life to do.
Right.
We have challenges. And how do we get through those?
Yes. And, I think that kind of falls into exactly what you were saying, Jill, on like prioritizing the well-being of your people leads to higher retention, higher engagement, higher profits, right? A stronger culture. That's directly related, right? Data shows us that. So sometimes it's conflicting when an organization is not prioritizing the well-being of their people, but still demanding right engagement and still looking for people to be retained in the organization. And so it can get, and I think that also contributes to being exhausted and burnt out, is because our minds are trying to go in two different directions. Like I'm trying to save money, but I'm also trying to retain my people. I'm trying to let people go, but I'm also trying to retain my people, right? And I'm also trying to communicate that our culture is fine. We're great. This is an awesome place to work, right? While also going through this process. And so just that alone, right, is mentally taxing. And like you said, we have very limited coping strategies.
We do. And I think we don't give enough credit to middle managers. And I think a lot of food safety quality, I'm going to say leaders, people fall in food safety middle managers. That's kind of where we live, right? Because we help on the front lines, but we're not, we are on the front lines, but there's also a lot of people in the middle doing programs and support and auditing and supplier and all of these areas where, often when companies say, hey, we're going to cut things, they like to go right through the middle.
Yes. Yes.
And so I'm sure I'd love to, put a little yes or emoji in the chat, because how many of you have experienced where they're like, this open position, we are not filling. So congratulations. You've just taken on a new role.
Right. Right. Yeah. We all have. And that's difficult for, a middle manager that's already overworked and burnt out, right? It's almost impossible to visualize how you're going to take on 1, 2, sometimes 3 or 4 roles that haven't been filled. Yeah. It's difficult to think about. And just that thought process, right, is exhausting. And it's also very interesting. I mean, if you've been here with us long enough, we talk a lot about middle managers. And that's because middle managers, they are like you said, they're the meat of the organization. They're typically the heaviest part. But they play a huge part in culture and like understanding your culture, but also implementing culture strategies and improvement. And it could either go up or it could go down based on how your middle managers feel about the work that they're doing, right? How engaged they are if you're retaining those middle managers. And a lot of times when people talk about it, they're either talking about at the very top, which doesn't represent that many people at all, right? Or they're talking about the very bottom, that that plays a piece, right? The operators, the people that's on the front lines, the very front of the
Mhm.
organization, they're talking about those people, which do have a major impact, but they're not involved in any of those strategy conversations. So this
Yeah.
middle manager is sort of playing it. I almost like, instead of looking at it like a pyramid, I almost see it as like a line, the people in the front, and then the leaders, the top leaders in the back, and the middle managers are communicating from the front of the line to the back of the line. And
Yeah.
if you don't have that there, then everyone's out of touch.
And I would say not even just communicating, they're translating and integrating.
Yes. Yes.
Because how often do we hear, gosh, you have to speak the language of the C suite? Well, that's what the middle group is attempting to do
Right.
better.
Mm-hmm.
How do
Mm-hmm.
we take these high level, lofty things of like, you know, sales goals and like cost of goods numbers and all of these other KPIs and
Mm-hmm.
translate that into like, what does that mean for us over here on
Right.
our daily work?
Right. Yeah.
And when you've got a culture where there's high trust, the people at the top understand they need to connect with people in the front lines and throughout the organization.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And that's really important. But then when you are in a space where you don't have as high of trust, right? Employees don't necessarily come to top leaders then or other leaders because they're like, I don't know if I can trust you.
Right.
And
Exactly.
so having these middle managers that are equipped to be able to engage people and create safe spaces and really help let them know that they're valued and taken care of is really important during uncertain times because they're
Absolutely.
not necessarily going to the same sources they went to before for information because they are uncertain of who they can trust.
Right, exactly. In the middle managers, they're the ones that is providing, like you said, the local strategy, right, for facilities for your frontline workers. They're the executors, right? And they're really the ultimate champions.
Yeah.
Because even when you think about that trust factor or even the no factor, right? A lot of times frontline support, they really don't know or have had any conversations with people that sit in top leadership. And
Mhm.
so someone that they know, like, and trust has to communicate that to them. And so that kind of falls on those middle managers. But there's also a piece of those middle managers that eventually they are going to be top leadership. And so ensuring that they have the right skills in order to lead the organization of the future is important. And then some of the things that we kind of talk about on, like, well, how do you communicate to the C suite? How do you communicate up? Some of those things kind of smooth out because they actually learn how to communicate and how to be effective and how to
Mhm.
influence as middle managers, so that when they're top leaders, they understand it in and out, right? Like, they understand how to restructure their middle managers. They understand how to prioritize their well-being and their effectiveness. And it's almost like a cycle, right? You got to
It
get
is.
out of this like poor cycle of like communicate, like we were just talking, right, with someone on like how to communicate to the C suite in like 2 bullet points, right?
Yeah.
Once you have leaders in the top of your organization that has actually been prioritizing how they lead and their effectiveness, then when they get to the top, it's more like, oh, we need to carve out a little bit more time for food safety because I know the impact that it has on culture, right,
Mhm.
at the middle manager level, and therefore at the front line level.
Yeah. And I know I'm totally biased, but even yesterday after that conversation, I was like, nothing exists in a food company without food safety.
Right. Nothing.
Nothing. You can't develop new products without it.
Mm.
You can't deliver on time product. You can't keep people. You can't have a budget. I mean, all of these things, because if you don't have food safety, we all know, like,
Yeah.
yes, it might not put one of the big eights completely out of business. They've survived recalls. Everybody has.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of organizations that can't, and won't recover.
Right.
And so
Absolutely.
without food safety, all of those other things are just a house of cards.
Hmm. Absolutely. And that's why it's important, even during an economic slowdown, right? It's important to still prioritize what is actually important to your organization. And as a matter of fact, you should get crystal clear about it.
You should.
And food safety, if you're a food company, right? Food safety is is there, right? It's top. But in to be a little bit more specific, food safety leaders must have the tools to implement the right food safety policies and programs to inspire the organization to move in the right direction, to be able to grow the capabilities of others, right? Like all of that piece, the leader needs to be equipped with the right tools to be able to do that.
Yes, because
Otherwise, it falls flat.
right, because if you're waiting for somebody else to do it, we know organizations have so many other priorities. And so that has to be you. And you all have heard us say this. You are the one. You have to be the catalyst.
Absolutely. Because, Jill, I can't remember where we were speaking, who we were speaking to. I think it could have been on the panel or something. But you had said, like, top leaders is just not going to get it one day.
Yeah.
Like, it's just not going to, like, you're not going to continue saying the same message. And then people are going to be like, yep, okay, yes, Jill, this is the 100th time that you said that. So I'm going to actually get it this time. Like we have to use different tools, right? We have to have different conversations. We have to do things a little bit differently. And you all know, knowing us, or if you don't, all of our programs and the way that we have these conversations is based on coaching. Because it is proven. It's proven to actually move the dial on things like culture, engagement, retention, as well as profitability
and behaviors.
Right?
Which is it's all about behaviors.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which, good lead-in. Usually we actually introduce ourselves so that if people are with us that don't know us, but we kind of just jumped right in.
You can tell we're
a whole bunch of talking about like what's going on,
Right.
why we're going to talk about this more. But yeah, at Catalyst, we are the industry source for leadership development programs for technical people in food. And why? Because like Tia just said, we've been through trainings. We have been in food safety from front lines all the way up to decision-making roles.
Mm-hmm.
And what we know is that our technical skills are fantastic, but they mean nothing if we can't influence and lead people.
Absolutely. Yes. They, when we talk about influence, really all of those technical skills, they go to waste.
They do.
They go to waste after a while if you're not able to influence the organization and lead.
Yeah. And we've also been through, we're going to call it the generic leadership development.
Oh, yes.
Like when somebody comes to your organization and offers this to operations or other groups, or, or you go to an outside event, outside like John Maxwell or, Franklin Covey, and I love those.
Mm-hmm.
But the element of how they approach it, principles are the same, but applying it in food is so different. Especially in food safety, because of the way we operate, balancing technical people leadership, being doers and then being leaders.
Yes. I always think about like when we talk about catalysts in this way, which is exactly what we do. I just think about how hard it is to be a leader in a technical field like this. Because you're right, the way that we have to lead is so different. We don't have, most of the time we don't have the authority to say, you know what, if you don't do this check or you don't do this, then I'm going to, even basic, I'm going to write you up. I'm going to give you a corrective action. Many times we don't even have that authority. So we have to be able to influence not just one counterpart, right? Like we have to influence many, right? In order to get one thing done. That is exhausting, right? Like that goes back to that mental exhaustion. But it could also be rewarding if you have the right tools to do it.
Yep. And that's why we're here.
That's why we're here. That's why we exist.
That's why we have practice coaching. We have practiced different management styles. We have practiced training. We have practiced all of these things and found that coaching is the most effective, which is why we've become certified coaches. Because that integrating into leadership principles is how we've created the programs that's progressive, specific, well planned, so that you and your whole team can start developing the bench strength and skills you need to be more effective. Because the
slowdown.
Yeah, because the slowdown that we have right now, like we just talked about, is much easier to face when you have the right tools and skills to do that.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit more about the slowdown, right? And
because we've just gone through a crazy period, right?
Yeah. And why are we here?
Yeah, during COVID, we couldn't make enough food.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't make enough. And McKinsey and Company even reported that industry sales were up 12% in 2020.
Mm.
That's pretty big.
That's pretty big. Especially
Yes.
when you see like single digit increases,
Because
right? Over time.
the average is usually 2, 4, 6% in
Right.
this range.
And we saw it all at the stores, right? Like we honestly could not make enough.
Mm-hmm. We could not make enough. So that we had this boom from the pandemic, and now, right, things, even like a process, it has to return to normal at some
Right.
point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we know that the slowing revenue is happening because of, a whole pile of things, but also because this is the normal cycle.
Mm-hmm.
But what concerns organizations is that, right, there's a slowdown, and we've probably forecasted, based on, hopefully conservatively, but probably somewhere in the middle about what we think sales will look like.
Right. Yeah.
But we also are looking at a spot where inflation is shifting and supplies have gone up. So we have declining net margins.
And that's exactly what organizations respond to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are those net margins. And when they start to decline, that's when they lead into cost saving projects, right?
And there's a McKinsey report. There's several of them. So if you want to search, they do a lot of work in like what are the trends that we're seeing in organizations. And they said when these things come up, CFOs, right, the people who run finance for our organization, when we get into slowdowns, they shift priorities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're like, we need to focus on short-term cash flow and how do we stay afloat?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you've worked with finance people, like that is a true shift. Like they're not having any other conversations other than cash flow, and I think one of the key words that you said is short term.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
they're trying to make sure that they're not getting unsustainable or major hits to their margins.
Yeah. And, McKinsey says, right, they're going to do these shifts. So they're going to focus on just the things that are the drivers of what the organization needs at that time.
Mm-hmm.
That can be operational things and it can be KPIs. So I think when we think about that, how many organizations have really strong and indicative KPIs for food safety and like leadership development
Mm-hmm.
that the top level people who are making decisions will see?
Right.
Because I think sometimes we roll things up and they may or may not be visible enough to be able to be seen as drivers for not only the short term, right? Because that's what we're focused on now, but long term.
Right, exactly. I think this is a unique position around culture. Well, in culture in general, but food safety culture. And the reason why, I like the conversation around food safety culture being a subset of culture, just like safety culture and people culture. And we have examples, right, from safety culture and people culture on how to roll up culture. In this case, is people development, right? Well-being of your staff, and then knowledge around food safety, right? All of those pieces, rolling that up into a broader KPI for the organization, that the organization is saying, it's important for us to meet this metric to be a successful organization. Like you said, in the short term, as well as in the long term.
Yes, because we all know, right, when our CFOs are like putting the brakes on or raising the flag that we've got some risk and we have some things ahead, our CEOs listen.
Yeah, they
right?
do.
That
They
is
do.
a really big driver.
Mm-hmm. Because they also understand that this is only a short period of time, and so does CFOs, right? Like they also know, right? Like we're going to get over this hump, and there's going to be something else, but they're just doing their role, right? They're doing their job, and if someone's not looking at the money in the short term, then we're all in trouble, right? So they're doing their role. It's more for our job is to make sure, and when we talk about like being the catalyst, like you being the catalyst, it really is your role and something that you can do right now to show how is making sure that we have effective leaders. How do we make sure that prioritizing and investing in the well-being of our people, what does that mean to your organization? And what does that mean short term and long term, and making sure that your leaders have that information so that, like you said, CEOs support that. So when they're having conversation with their CFO, they're saying, this is the information that I have from a leader standpoint that we want to make sure that we're still prioritizing, because it's going to help with those numbers now,
Yeah.
and it's also going to help with those numbers when we're out.
And I think this is why it's so important for us to be integrated business partners, because
Mm-hmm.
when when people start talking about the slowdown, like this isn't something that just came up in the past 6 months, right? There are forecasts that have been out for a while that predict where things are going. And so as food safety leaders, if we even, if we can have just even a high level understanding or awareness of where that's at, it helps us even prepare for moments like this.
Yes.
Because this is where we'd be like, good thing we started on our leadership development programs 2 years ago.
Right.
Because
Yes.
now when we're in this spot where we're like, gosh, our company is really asking us to like take some things out of the budget.
Mm-hmm.
How do you even look at that then to be like, short term, we can because we've already done some investment. And then when we kind of navigate through this in the next 3 or 6 months, we're going to be full force again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's such a good point, because typically we're trying to drink from an empty cup.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like we're trying to find these savings, but we haven't really done any work, right, to have that foundation to say, okay, we're going to pull back here because we have strong talent there,
Yeah.
right? The organizations that's really going to take a hard hit on culture are the ones that have not been doing this work.
Yeah. And if you haven't started the work or as much work as you want to, now is still a good time to plan.
Absolutely.
Because getting through this slowdown, yes, there will be a phase where it will feel like that. But that's why it's already planting the seeds to say, what's our budget for 2024 look like? What
Yeah.
does it look for 2025?
Yeah.
Because it also demonstrates that you're thinking further out how
Mm-hmm.
food safety is an enabler for continued business support.
Right. Absolutely. And we talk about this with all of our clients, whether you are a startup or you are a multi-billion dollar company. Like a lot of the conversations that we have with our clients is around, what are your goals, right, in your organization, and where do you want to go? Because that work that we do as integrated business partners, it's important to know that information. That's why we ask those questions, because if you don't have someone in food safety as a leader in the organization that understands where the organization is going, and what are they prioritizing, and what products are coming next, and what markets you want to enter in, then we're already behind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're just playing catch up. And if you've been there, right, like playing catch up is really hard, and you need
Yes.
double the resources to be able to catch up to where the organization where they want to go.
Yeah. And that's why even in boot camp, we start with what are the relationships you need to build now? Who needs to be in your circle?
Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
means it's not just my normal circle, like maybe maintenance, sanitation,
Right.
operations, R&D. This is how do I look ahead to the marketing strategist? What
Mm-hmm.
can they help me understand about where we're going so that it's not just tomorrow's product innovation, but it's looking out 5 years?
Yes.
How do we work with the person who, like the finance person, not just our accounting person to help us perhaps with the budget numbers right here, but what does the market look like going out as well, so that we can really have a better sense of how we partner within the organization and support our team.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
when we're faced with uncertainty, understanding high level, even kind of where the market's going and how the industry is shifting is important as a food safety professional.
Absolutely. And if you are a leader that is not in food safety, and you're listening to this, and you're on the line of like, should I really invite, my food safety leader to be a part of those conversations? I would tell you that just think back to the headache of you've gotten everything figured out, and then you introduce it right to other teams, and food safety is like, oh, we don't even have the infrastructure to support that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like just from a risk standpoint. Or you thought maybe it will be a 6 month project, but it's more like an 18-month project because we don't have things developed.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing those ahead of time and saying, oh, we know this is coming down the line. Let's get started on it, like with the same resources, with the people. Let's start chipping away at it So when you're ready to announce it to the organization and ready to do something different, you already have all your ducks in a row,
Yeah.
right? Where you're able to go and move quickly.
It's like you're talking about what we do in strategic leader,
Absolutely. True.
right? That's exactly what we do. We ask you to kind of move from some of the day to day and building relationships that are foundational. But
Mhm.
like, how do we get to the next place where we really are thinking more strategically about what we need to do to integrate?
Yes. Yes. Which is key when you think about culture, right? And it's so interesting when people say, well, what is culture? What is food safety culture? All the things we're talking about today impacts culture,
Mhm.
right? Really being able to be integrated partners and have those conversations early and often, and planning for the future and where the organization wants to go, and being able to communicate that and plan, all of that is a part of culture, right?
Mhm.
And with or without the words, food safety culture, that's exactly the type of work that should be happening day in and day out if you want a sustainable culture, and a culture where people feel like, they're not overworked, they're not exhausted, and they feel like they have the right support and the right development.
Mhm. And I think that's another important part about leading with uncertainty because,
Mhm.
right, sometimes, on the front line, it can be really tough.
Mhm.
People are asking questions. We might not be getting all the information. And we don't want to be like, rah, rah, it'll all be okay. We hope it will. But we also have to think like future thinking attitude.
Yeah.
How do we help people go, yes, we are in a tough spot, but together we can focus on where we're going next?
Hmm.
Because that's part of what helps us be stronger as a team. It helps us get through those hard things. It helps us
Yeah.
build, the buzzword resilience
Hmm.
that companies are looking for because like we just talked about, there's normal fluctuation in the up and downs
Right.
that
Exactly.
help us build the resilience. So when we get the big one,
Hmm.
we're ready.
Yes.
We've already done the investment.
Right, exactly. You've already done those pieces of building relationships and having those conversations, and you're right, this does really flow with the programs that we have, because boot camp is all about setting those expectations, building that foundation, practicing, right? It's like practicing during those small spikes, right? So that when you're ready to really cash in, when you're ready to really go through something like an economic slowdown, you're equipped. You have that foundation that you can lean on, that you've been doing work on. And, I even like the way you put it around leading with uncertainty.
Mm.
That's exactly what people are trying to figure out. They're uncertain if the organization is going to turn around, right? They're uncertain what consumers are going to do. They're uncertain about whether or not someone's going to quit in the next week or
Yes.
two, right? So like that uncertainty exists. I think it goes back to those coping strategies, right? Like, do you have the right tools to lead through uncertainty?
Mhm.
Do you have the right tools to still build on culture during uncertainty? How do you make sure that as a leader, you're not doing more damage? Like those
Yeah.
are, that just, some people have natural leadership tendencies, but to really go into a space that is uncomfortable, that's where all this practice, reflection, things that we talk about all the time, right? With Catalyst programs and why we use coaching, all of those things just step in a time that you're uncomfortable because you've been practicing along the way.
Yeah. And having some discomfort is one thing. But I
Mm.
think even when we talk about some of these big spikes of uncertainty, we've talked a lot about even Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And
Yeah.
of course, that translates into engagement as well. But essentially, the ground your team members are walking on, and probably even you, is feeling mighty shaky.
Yes.
We're not sure, like you said, are we going to have a job tomorrow? What's going to happen next?
Hmm.
And those things can be right. Those things bring up feelings and thoughts that typically don't maybe surface.
Right. Yeah.
And so how do you stay in this space where you create some your own self-awareness of what you're feeling, but also then compassion for others? Because
Right.
sometimes these type of uncertain times don't always bring out the best in others.
That is true.
And so how do you actually lean into that and be like, wow, they could, that's actually, I'm just like them.
Right. Yeah.
Like I have been in that space, or they're just like me. And can we listen without having judgment? Because it's an emotional roller coaster ride.
It is. And as a leader, you're also taking on others' emotions. It's
Mhm.
one of the reasons, like, so if you've been through boot camp, you have completed your workload capacity. And a piece of knowing where you're at and right sizing your work for your own capacity is important, because when things like this happen and your team is walking this unsteady ground, you must take time, right, to have those conversations and reassure and guide them, right, through coaching strategies, right. It is a part of your job, right, as a leader, to help your team through, and many times to help other team members through, because you're seen as a leader in the organization. And so, like, even when I think about, like, and it might not be something as major as COVID, but just think about when your organization is going through something, right, whether they're going through a restructuring or they're going through a major recall. At that point, it I remember taking time out, and, like, for a week or more, I'm meeting with direct reports and people who are not even directly reporting into me, having those conversations to make sure that they feel heard, to make sure that they feel supported, that they are being supported in the right way. And we don't think about that. And again, that's that middle managers, right? We don't think about that being a part of the role. But if you are prioritizing development and you're prioritizing leadership, then you understand that that is. And when things
Mhm.
like this happen, that a huge chunk of your leader's time is going to be there to maintain the culture that you have through this uncertainty, and maybe even improve it, right? Like, you can improve culture through uncertainty. It's just whether or not you have equipped your leaders with the right tools and you are giving them that time resource to do it.
And I think that's one of those, I don't want to say it's a balance thing,
Mhm.
because I don't know if there's necessarily a balance during uncertain times. And there is, maybe it's boundaries. I'm not sure the right
Mhm.
word. It'll come to me maybe as I talk about it. But I think it's also when you're on uncertain times, that clear expectations and priorities is even more critical.
Yes. Yes.
Because I don't know about you, but right, I've been in food safety and quality. I've had kind of the list of here are all the things, and then here are all my pet projects.
Right.
The
Yes.
things that maybe didn't make the top list, but as a team, we knew were important to get done.
Right.
Doesn't mean they're less important. But
Mhm.
when you're in a time where you need to be available for your people, how do you say no to things? And which things do you say no to? And I get that sounds way easier said than done. But even if it's we put this off for a month, we put this off for 6 months,
Yeah.
that's part of this decision making. This is
Mhm.
part of the risk assessment to say, in these uncertain times, what has shifted
Yeah.
and how is that impacting what our original plans were?
Mhm.
Because if you try to do all of it, that's where we get the burnout.
Mhm.
And if you're focused on, and I'm going to stereotype, we're lots of doers.
Yeah, we are.
We are a group of doers and we feel comfortable doing because that's what we're comfortable.
When
Dealing with
we get
people's
stuff done.
emotions is a learned skill.
Mhm. It's
And
true.
so learn, like you said, coping and leaning into that more is something that we're naturally going to shy away from if it's not the place that we feel comfortable or we're uncertain of how do we help.
Right,
And
exactly.
so when we talk about how do you lead during uncertainty, right? It's understanding the high level industry market where we're going. It's about developing people, but it's also really about saying no and having some boundaries as well.
Absolutely. And if leadership is actually a top KPI for the organization in some format, right? These are the type of conversations that leaders will be having, right? How does this economic slowdown impact our leaders and what
Yeah.
they do in their time? And where do we want them to spend our time?
Yeah, I would even argue that, when you're when you're looking at even where your development budget is, of course I'm biased, when you're like, oh my gosh, we still had 4 people that needed to go for this training, or we needed to have this in-house PCQI training or this HACCP training. Maybe what you really need right now is training on mindset and compassion and dealing with uncertainty.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's even re-looking at the things that are going to help support your team members be able to then step into HACCP training with a mindset that allows them to absorb more? How
Yes.
does it help position them to think, my company values me? So now when I go to PCQI training, like my well-being is taken care of, and now I can focus on these technical aspects of my role
Hmm.
as well.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I think that we see that. We see that from people who are at an organization that prioritizes their well-being and that, that has a strong culture, how they interact in a technical training versus people who come from organizations that not prioritizing their well-being, that they're burnt out. It's almost like they're in there and they are checking the box, right? Like, yep, I'm going to have this certification, but my organization is not going to do that, right? I don't have the resource to really roll out HACCP the way I want to. I don't have the resource to really build a food safety plan. Like that's in their mind, right?
Mhm.
And that's what they're bringing into
Absolutely.
the technical training. And so, you paid this money for this technical training, but really this person is like, yeah, I mean, I can put it on my resume, check. So I could use it to leave the organization, but I'm really not
Exactly.
bringing anything back.
Yes, and I think that's sometimes we see that. I've experienced that
Mm-hmm.
where I'm like, all right, they're not invested. There isn't investment in culture and development here. So yeah, what can I get out of this so that I can move to the next place that's a better fit?
Right. You know what? I've been in the same place. I remember talking with a group and, I'm trying to influence them to go a direction. And then there gets to be a certain place where you're like, you know what? I've done this before, so it's really not adding to my resume. What can I do to add to my resume while I'm here for a short period of time? Like I've already said, I know I'm not going to be here long term, right? Like, what can I do to actually add to my resume to get some experience with, to do that I'm going to focus on for myself because the organization is not at a place where it's ready to move
Mhm.
forward. And so when that happens, right, like I've totally disengaged,
Mhm.
you know?
Yes, and that's part of why it's so important to help people feel heard, valued,
Mm,
and purpose.
yeah. And I appreciate this example, Jill, you bringing up this example, because I never really thought about it from that standpoint of, but I remember having those conversations, even with my husband, who you guys may know is also in food safety and quality. So conversations at home are interesting. Um, or boring to some people, right? But I remember even saying, like, why am I pushing to build a quality management system? I've already done it, right? So it's not like I need to do it. They don't want to do it. So, like, I'm really just going to focus on how do I build up my skills, right? So, what is it that they need that fits, right? And I need as experience. Those are the things I'm going to push and work on versus this other really big thing that they do need, but they don't want to, and they don't want to invest in, they don't want to go down that path.
Mm,
And so, but I've never really, it's almost like at the time, right, I'm in it, but to go back and be able to reflect on it, it's like I completely disengaged. And so if you have people thinking that way during an economic slowdown, productivity has just tanked for me, right? But also for anybody that's in that situation. It has completely tanked, which is not what you need as an
no.
organization during an economic slowdown.
Right. And I think with that, right, we sense when there's that, I think earlier was like false optimism or
Mhm.
even false encouragement. So
Yeah.
when companies are like, yay, 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 like we get when we feel like we're going to do all of this, but we don't feel like it's going to be returned.
Mm. Yeah.
And I think that's a really big part of uncertainty in how do we help, even if we're uncertain of where our organization stands on that, people work for managers,
Mhm.
right? And so, what can you offer? What can you do to support your team in this moment of appreciating what they're doing and being grateful that they're showing up every day and really helping them see that they're making a difference in today's work right now with the immediate people and the people that they're interacting with?
Mhm. And you really can do that just in your current role.
Mhm.
Just within your circle of influence, you can do that and you can start making that progress. And you could use that to influence the rest of the organization because everyone wants great results,
They
right? Like
do.
they want great results. They want that profit. They want that engagement, right? They want those cost savings. All organizations want that. So if you can do that in your circle of influence, people are going to be like, wow, what's happening over there? What are you doing differently? How are you leading differently? And that's
Mm-hmm.
what we talk about at Catalyst, whether you're going through our leadership development or you're looking at how to spark your own culture. Like we're really looking at how do you make a difference in where you are so that you can influence the rest of the organization. Earlier on when we started Catalyst, if you look at some early stuff for us, we kind of talked about sparking, culture, transforming it, and accelerate it. And we still talk about that in a different way, but it really does follow it starts with a spark.
Mm-hmm.
It starts with you, and you're able to transform your area, and then people, I mean, are naturally drawn to these things, right? And you should be shouting it from the rooftops too, right? Like there's a piece that you own to get that message out
Yes.
so that it can start to accelerate
Mm-hmm.
through the organization, right? And that's when you really focus on, man, we can get these results across the organization if we were integrated business partners.
Mm-hmm.
If we
Yeah.
thought about it before, right?
Well, and I think that's a really important aspect because it goes above and beyond just building a good relationship. Right? Like
Mm-hmm.
if I have a good relationship with you, Tia, but I'm not able to influence you or ask you for what I need, then how does that fit to help us both drive our personal, our professional, and our organizational goals forward?
Right. Yeah.
And so I think that's a really big part of thinking about, like, even in times of uncertainty, we have to be equipped to be able to stand in these spaces to say, this is actually what I need. Like, I'm not just the nice person here to help you and, be the extra hand, but like, there are some things that I need, or I need to help making decisions, or I've made a decision, or,
Mm-hmm.
there's a million things you could throw into that spot.
Yeah, you can. And you know what? I was just having this conversation, and I think that this is like a missing piece, especially for quality leaders.
Mm.
Like quality and quality engineering is all about efficiency, and with that, driving out costs. And if your organization is not using their resources that they already have, right? Like this is not adding headcount, right? Now it might be reprioritizing what a person is working on, right, and getting their workload right. But it's like you have this talent there, right, to develop and to lean on. And they might already have the technical expertise around it. They just need the leadership piece to be able to really influence the organization and go after those cost savings. Because
Mm.
during an economic slowdown, that's what organizations are looking for. So, how do you tap into those technical experts, right? Help them develop into technical leaders so that they can lead the organization and realize these cost savings, realize this development that people are doing, right? If you're prioritizing that development.
Yeah. And that even goes along with something that I found in Harvard Business Review, where they really talked about sometimes in this space where we have uncertainty, it's actually an opportunity. We might not see it as an opportunity because we have so much going on, but how can you relook at some of the work that you're doing? Can you reimagine or create different roles? Because once again, as we talked about, this role is open. Those things usually transfer over to other people for some amount of time,
Right.
or the things that we've talked about, like these efficiencies, like administrative things that we've been wanting to move over for so long. Like, it's a great time to do that. So once
Mhm.
again, it's doing that. We're opening people up to do more value added, purposeful work
Yeah.
that has a bigger impact on the organization.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Because
When I was,
having a food safety quality leader just fill out reports and check a box because we have to have a signature. Yes, that's important, but how do we make it easier, better, faster?
exactly.
Yeah.
And save, and like that means you're seeing those cost savings. I think it's interesting during these times that, really to your point, Jill, like where organizations go through this and then it's like everyone slows down, but everyone is being so inefficient.
Yes.
It's like,
It highlights almost more of it. Like, we're
yeah, it
so
does.
efficient.
It does. It does. When in reality, leaders should really be thinking through, okay, what are the top things we should be doing during this time? And how do we do them better?
Yeah.
Like you said, faster, more efficient. Like how do we do that? That's the things we should be working on, because
Yeah,
those
and I
are
think
the things that's going to bring us what we need during this short period of time.
yeah, and I think along with that, that goes back to the whole priorities. You
Hmm.
can't say, well, I mean, I don't know how many times I've seen people be like, I can't even name our top 5 priorities because we have like 20.
Yes.
And not a priority, folks. Come on. And you all know it because you're feeling it.
Hmm.
So success comes from the discipline of going, I can work on one thing. And there's I wish I had a link to drop in and maybe I'll find it. But right, if we're working on 5 projects, if we're working on all of them for the whole year, we don't realize any of the benefits till the end of the year for all 5.
Yeah.
Instead, take one, get it done in 2 months, all benefit the rest of the year.
Yes.
Take the second one. Now you get benefits from project 1 for like 10 months and project 2 for 8 months and project 3, right? You get benefits right away. The
Hmm.
same thing applies when we talk about these uncertain times and the shift. Work on one, get it done well, do the next one.
Hmm. And you know what? I think that ties directly into what we talked about CFOs are even looking for, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're looking for those short-term gains. And
Yes.
so cleaning up your process, or making something more efficient, and making sure that you have the right leaders, right, that can do this work, that goes straight to the bottom line.
Mm-hmm. It does.
Mhm.
Whew.
And exactly what they're talking about, right, during these economic slowdowns.
Yeah. So as leaders, sometimes, as food safety quality leaders, sometimes we're kind of just responding to the things that are going on around us. Like, hey, right, we need to streamline here. We need more hours here. We're not filling this role here. We need you to do this. That happens. We've
Yeah.
been there. But hopefully today, what you've taken away is there are some spaces where you get to step in and be kind of the driver of some of these areas where you go. And maybe it's not the big, like overarching organizational goal, but like what in your space can you stop and go, I can make change here?
Yeah.
So is it understanding markets so that you can be a better influencer and a better business partner?
Hmm.
Is it understanding when these times of uncertainty come up and you just need to create boundaries? You
Yes.
need to say no because that's for you and for your team.
Right. Yes.
How do you think ahead for taking care of your team and giving them the skills that they can also use for coping, but also during this uncertainty, kind of that elevated sense of, of taking care?
Yeah. Yeah. Of themselves and each other.
Yes.
Right. Because that is definitely going to, I mean, it spreads through the team. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And if you give your team those tools, right, that's even less time that you have to use those tools for that team. Right.
Yes.
Because they have those coping skills. They have those tools to do it for themselves and for others. So that frees up some time for you,
Mm-hmm.
right, to work on other things.
It does. And then lastly, like we talked about, like how do you prioritize? So if that comes from working on efficiencies with like your engineer group or your team, or if it looks at how do I maybe structure a few things on my team or even in my workload so that I can align with perhaps some of the short-term goals that are needed to get over this hump so that we can then, let me say, return to a normal state.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right,
Yeah.
I was jotting those down as we were talking about them, so I'm not sure if I missed any. Tia, were there other ones that were like, here are some good takeaways, or if the audience has anything that they're like, take
No,
away?
I think those are great takeaways. The only thing that I would just um add, it's not really add, but really to highlight, is that all of this works extremely well, and we can get ahead of it if we are integrated business partners. And
Yes.
so and that is the goal, right? That's the goal of, as we think about food safety culture and as we think about development of people, is how do we help organizations integrate food safety and quality into the way that they do work, in the way that they innovate, in the way that they sell, in the way that they market, in the way that they manufacture, in all of the pieces. Because that's what, I mean, you can't stop culture. You can't do culture one day and stop it the next and do it, like based on who's in the room. Culture is always there. And so if food safety culture as a subset is important, it really should be a part of the way that you do work.
Absolutely. And so, hopefully, from just having this is our off the cuff conversations about it. Like,
This is
how
something
do we,
that we know people have been talking about, right? And obviously it's been on our mind, and that's why we have real talk.
we have, but it's also been things that we hear kind of happening out here. But what are the things that we're bringing here for us to be able to do to weather, I'm going to say weather the storm a little bit better or easier.
Yeah.
More
And you,
importantly, for our team.
absolutely. And you have that authority, that permission, right? Like it really does start with you. And I would say, like, if you don't have those skills, like, invest in it and get those skills, because it's important. And you definitely see, I mean, we've all probably have seen it, leaders who know how to lead during uncertainty and the ones that don't.
Yeah.
And that impact.
And if you're thinking, I don't even know where I would start, reach out, check out our website. Because number one, today or yesterday, Food Safety Magazine dropped an article that we wrote about, 15 stats you need to know to get the dollars you need for development in your budget. Awesome, right? We need things that are compelling, but also things that are real, right? How do we demonstrate that development here means more dollars in the pocket here?
Right.
There's some data in there that I'm betting and I'm certain you've never seen before. So we've got that. Number two, on our website under the food safety leader section, we have a workbook that you can download. It's a step-by-step guide on how do you create a solid business case to get the dollars you need for development.
So valuable. So valuable. I wish I had this, honestly.
Right? Yeah. I mean, it's a little amazing, but that's because we've already gone through this pain more than once.
Right. Yeah.
More than once. And you don't have to do it alone. You don't have to figure it all out. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. What you do need to know is what are the things important to your organization, and how do you step into the space where you're going to go, I can be the spark. The change starts with me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. So
and
boy.
I say, and all of that because we have cohorts starting in fall.
We do. We're so
cohort will be opening up. Look at, where are my notes? On September 12th, the next boot camp cohort starts.
Yes.
It'll be done by the end of the year. We also have strategic. So you can sign up for strategic if you have been through boot camp. Because, right, got to lay the foundation first. It's the GMPs.
That's right.
And that starts, and that's a 6-month program for leaders that are ready for understanding themselves better, understanding others better, and then understanding how we fit into the organization better. Kind of fits our pillars, doesn't it?
It does. It does. And it's building on that foundation of boot camp, like you said, right? Like, how do I continue to lead at a different level? Right now that I have these relationships, now that I've been practicing and reflecting on what type of leader I am, how do I now bump it up, right? And how do I become that strategic leader in an organization?
Yeah, I'm excited about it. And maybe because we're in a slowdown, you're like, you know what? I can get me in it, but I can't get my whole team in it. Good. Let's get you some new skills so that then you're ready to really ramp up and advocate for your team for the next cycle.
Absolutely.
Right? Every bit counts.
Absolutely. So we're super excited about this. It's like our first announcement. Of course we do it on Real Talk, right? So if you're here on Real Talk, you get the deets sooner than anyone else.
Yes, you do. But we so appreciate that you've joined us today. And we'd love to know what nuggets or what comments you have around, like, what do you do in a slowdown? How is it impacting you? And what have you found to work to help just, once again, weather the storm?
Absolutely. Yes. And we'll love to see you at IFP. So reach out to us, say hello. We're happy to connect and meet at IFP. All you have to do is send us a note.
Yep. So we will see you next week live from IAFP.
All right.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.